Well, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Now, relocating U.S. troops from bases in Western Europe to Poland would be a good, though costly way to channel Donald Trump's frustration with NATO. Daniel Fried, former U.S. ambassador to Poland, told the Polish press agency. Now, the remarks come as reports suggest possible U.S. troop repositioning from Germany, Spain and Italy toward NATO's eastern flank and the U.S. Now, the president is now reacting to those nations he deems as unsupportive with the U.S. strikes against Iran. Now, we ponder that question. Could managing Trump's pressure ultimately reshape or fracture NATO? Now, we discuss it further with our guest, Robert Pszczel, Senior Fellow, Center for Eastern Studies. Good to have you with us here on TVP World.
Good morning.
So what do you make of the former ambassador's statement there? Good and costly? What are the advantages and the disadvantages here?
I think this is Donald Trump, if I'm not mistaken, right? Who's a wise person with lots of experience, and he, of course, also is an old friend of Poland. But the truth is, this is, such a, maneuver transfer would be extremely complicated and indeed extremely costly because, some of the bases we're talking about potential candidates for either closure or so-called transfer. They've been established decades ago. A lot has been invested there by, the hosts, but also by Americans. We're talking about, enormous sort of type of operation. And let's also not forget, while, of course, we the Poles concentrate on our own country and the benefits, which I think are recognized fully, of the U.S. presence, and therefore increased U.S. presence would be welcome, then one should not ignore the fact that the American presence, the bases, the harbors, different other agreements, preposition equipment, etc., HQ elements, they serve the whole NATO. So any kind of, drastic rupture, whether it concerns one or the other country, irrespective of, let's say, the political, motivations behind it, would, in some respects, in some ways, I think, kind of harm NATO itself. Because, if there is a military strategic logic, such as, okay, we need to take some of the resources, which is, no surprise there as Americans, because we have to face the threat in the Indo-Pacific, but we do it in an orderly manner. It's a bit like, we already had a small decrease in the presence, U.S. presence in Romania, but that was kind of well explained. That's one thing, but it's another thing when suddenly things start happening simply because president doesn't like this or the other country, because according to himself, this country did not behave properly, so to speak, during such and such an operation. So that's not a good pattern, and therefore all bets are off, because how can we plan things and so on. So yes, I'm Polish, so of course I think most Poles will not be unhappy about the fact of having more U.S. troops, even if they moved from other parts of Europe. But in itself, if that process was just due to a certain, whim or political displeasure with other allies, that's not good news. There will not be good news for NATO overall, and that's the thing which matters a lot, in my view.
Yeah. So exactly on that point, how much of this, as you said, is really strategic logic versus that emotional knee-jerk reaction? And then also, quite simply put, we've had these kind of things from Trump before. So, is this something in your mind, you see this as a policy that was shifting already, or is this just another tantrum, an emotional reaction, and it's going to be different by the end of next week? Right, so we were speaking there with Robert Pszczel. I think that we were covering just now.
Hello?
Robert, can you still hear me? I don't know if you heard that last question.
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, there was some kind of technical glitch. Yeah. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so just gently, we've had this kind of emotional reaction before from Trump. As you said, is there some kind of strategic logic behind this, or is this just temporary? And what does that mean for other strategic plans of NATO in the future?
Well, the truth is complicated and simple. We are in the process of some kind of transformation, and therefore, when the terms such as burden shifting, U.S., doing less and perhaps being present less in Europe, Europeans take up the burden. That is a process which is kind of natural and is accepted as the right one. And I think it's actually ongoing, has been ongoing for quite some time, that there's no need to kind of make big drama about it. But then when we come to the point where a different kind of sentiment is introduced, and that's what we heard from President Trump persistently in the last few days. So it's kind of, it's strong in his mind that, allies are useful, NATO is a paper tiger, etc. That is unfair. That is the only good news for the adversaries of US and allies. And actually, it doesn't make sense from the point of view of both the American sentiments, because people in US still support stronger NATO. This is a very personal, very emotional view of the president, and therefore he should be, to the extent possible, talked out of this. So in that sense, what Secretary General Rutte was doing in Washington was kind of, trying to absorb this anger of sorts, which in my view is just not really justified. But the problem is you cannot just keep on nodding all the time and saying things which are frankly not true, that, this war has had no effect, and we are better off, the war against Iran. That is just not true. It had enormous effect, and mainly on the allies. That US policy already, as we have it, towards Russia is actually helping either Ukraine or Europeans. That is not really correct. So, and frankly, I don't know exactly what Sascha meant when he said that some allies have not fulfilled their commitments in terms of the war in Iran. There were no commitments because the allies were never asked, and still are not very clear what exactly would the White House administration wanted to do. So we need some more clarity, and frankly, perhaps a bit more straight talk, because too much of this sort of attempt has not been terribly successful in terms of changing the sentiments of President Trump by just praising him. That simply does not work.
Yeah, and let's also go to the genesis of this. I mean, this latest genesis of this visit of NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Washington. He met, obviously, President Trump, but he's also met other important leaders, also, I think, including some in Congress. So tell us a little bit more about what was that visit ultimately? Was it a success? How did he manage this? Did he come back? I mean, he said the whole thing with Trump was very frank, but ultimately his whole visit there, how do you characterize it?
Well, it's, Secretary General of NATO goes to Washington quite often, and particularly at times where you need to do things and really discuss fundamental issues, because US is the key country in NATO. That's, some people have criticized. I think that's wrong. It was a good thing that Sascha went to Washington and he's had those meetings. He talked to, of course, key people, starting with the president, but also Secretary of State, Secretary of War, and the readout of the other meetings was not too bad. Speaking to congressmen and senators is fundamental because, they, of course, are the ultimate guarantors of the fact that there would not be any rash decision to move out of NATO. But also, as I mentioned, the truth is that there is a majority of support and understanding for, the value of NATO, not just for Europeans and other members such as Canada, for example, but also for the US. So one has to explain and one has to nurture that understanding, because, at the time of political difficulties and frankly disagreements, this is extremely important. So, in that sense, it's a very useful contribution. The question to what extent Secretary General used his time and his meetings to kind of, persuade everybody, I'm not so sure, because, as I said, some of the arguments he used were not convincing to Europeans, because the truth, the center of his keys, he is the one person that could be pivotal in terms of this very special and unusual form of dialogue that President Trump likes to conduct from the point of view of other allies. But other allies recently have have somewhat, lost a bit of confidence in the Secretary General, whether he's really representing their views. So hopefully this visit will kind of, set NATO on the right path. We have the summit coming up, and the allies need to hear more, because I'm not sure if the allies themselves, the capitals, have been fully briefed on his conversation. So I don't know more than the allies do, and I'm not sure if they all know so much, as much as they should already about his conversations.
Yeah. Another thing that's come up in the last sort of couple of days is another comment by President Trump regarding Greenland. Again, he's talking about this. He's mentioning again this is something that he wasn't given. Is this next, let's say, challenge in the alliance? Will we have more of a focus here? What do you think of the significance of Trump mentioning again Greenland?
Well, it's a form of blackmail, frankly speaking, because, it's like, okay, you think you've resolved this? No, you haven't, because I'm going to come back to this. And, it's not just disingenuous, but this is very worrying, because it's not, if one takes them at face value, what President says about Greenland, what is it? It's just a badly managed piece of ice. I mean, that doesn't make sense, frankly. It's, if we're talking about the strategic importance for the US and other allies of Greenland and the whole region, then it's a different ballgame. But again, if he's just coming back to his idea that has no support whatsoever, and could even, in worst come to worst, lead to the breakup of the alliance, which is that, I want Greenland, full stop. That's just not very helpful. And let's not forget how badly was this kind of talk received in the US itself. So this is not a sign of the president, which is who is kind of wants to tread on an adult path. This is kind of different. He's basically showing his anger about the conduct of the Iran war, which from a human point of view is understandable, but obviously leads to the question. Well, it would have made sense to listen to the voice of both his own advisors, but also
sorry to interrupt you, Robert. Sorry to jump in. And exactly as you said, that emotional, I will close with that. And that was also former ambassador said very much, Rutte trying to find that narrow path forward that simply bypasses Trump's thunder. And with that, we'll conclude. Thank you so much, as always.
Very tricky.
Robert Pszczel there from the Center for Eastern Studies. Thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.